I'm Lori O'Malley, professor here in psychology and sociology. I mainly teach in the community counseling program. But anyway, teaching abnormal is one of my most favorite classes. And I thought I'd drop something in that I normally talk about in my on-ground classes, but we don't have anything about in our textbook. So some of you may have been wondering when we're going to get around to talking about psychopaths and sociopaths and serial killers and stuff like that. We don't really get into that in abnormal psych because those are not necessarily DSM diagnoses. However, I have studied a lot about this because it's something I'm interested in. And so I just wanted to share some things with you that I have learned. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the media. We're going to talk about why this is not a DSM diagnosis, key researches, how this stuff gets started, and then what do you do to treat people like this? So obviously you can see some movie posters, some series on Netflix, those kind of things. If you haven't seen The Patient, watch it. It's fascinating, but it's not real at all. Some of you have probably seen that. I think it's on Netflix, maybe. I couldn't get past the 3rd episode because I found it too creepy and it was a little disturbing for me. And I think it gets more disturbing as it goes along. My Friend Dahmer, I like that. It gave me some emotion towards Dahmer that I wasn't expecting. Anyway, there's talk about how social media impacts our feelings about others and our ability to really have empathy and relate to others. And then I put this book up in your right-hand corner, The Wisdom of the Psychopaths. I've read it and it's pretty good. It's a description about the characteristics of what we would call psychopaths. And the things that we can learn from them. So it's not going to turn you into a psychopath, but it takes a look at all of the characteristics, whether they're, how they play out negatively in people's lives and how they could benefit you. So anyway, that's that. So historically, psychopathy is not a DSM diagnosis and it has never been a DSM diagnosis. But historically, we've got some things from our way past that talk about people who fit these characteristics. So the first one being in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy, there's a story about the uncontrollable son, and he is a person who drinks a lot, he lies constantly, he charms people, he manipulates people into giving him what he wants. So he's kind of a do-nothing, except for he's living large off of his manipulations of other people. So it kind of tells you how to handle that. Get rid of that person, basically, is what the Old Testament says. They're a little harsh. The next one is Greek philosophy, and it talks about the unscrupulous man. Basically, same characteristics where he's manipulating people and using them and living off of them with little, he doesn't care about any consequences, and he doesn't care what happens to the other people either. So there's the story of that and how that runs through Greek society. Get up to the 19th century, which is really the 1800s, and then you're looking at mania without delirium. So the mania at that point would have been extreme narcissism and feeling like, I'm the greatest, I'm the best there ever was, and I'm the smartest, and this and that and the other. So that would have been mania. The moral insanity is really moral because at the time we were looking at morals and it was Victorian era stuff. So they were looking at the same kind of characteristics, being someone who lies a lot, manipulates other people, doesn't care how this impacts other people, only cares about himself. So again, there's a lack of morality there. And the last one, the psychopathic inferiority, really means the same thing, that this person is less than because they don't have any empathy and they don't have that ability to relate to other people. So it's again with that morality kind of thing to it. But we come up to the 20th century, we start looking at terms like sociopathic personality, which for a while was actually in the DSM. It's not anymore. We call it something else now, but it was listed as a diagnosis. And now we have this antisocial personality disorder, which is what is in the DSM, and all of those things throughout history, they all describe a person with the same basic characteristics. Right? So our modern diagnosis is going to include something where the diagnostic part is going to include something out of cluster B, which you know now that cluster B has antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. So it's going to be one of those four that are going to clue in to how we're going to diagnose this person. But the basic descriptors of what we're looking for is a person who consistently violates the rights of others. I don't care if that's your property. I want it, so now it's mine. I don't care if I manipulate you out of your life savings. I don't care what you do in retirement. I don't care if you're eating cat food. It's mine, so I don't care what happens to you, right? Which is the person who participates like in a Ponzi scheme where they're scamming you out of your investment money in a corporation that doesn't even actually exist. Or if you've watched, oh gosh, on Netflix, there's a documentary about this guy. Oh, it's the Fire Festival, and total antisocial personality disorder with a heavy dose of narcissism. And he sets up this whole giant music festival on this island, and he charges people like $25,000 a head to come to it. And there is no music festival. There is an island, and people actually show up at it, but there's nothing there. So it's really, I mean, wow, bizarre. So again, showing no empathy, chronic liar, which is also called Machiavellianism. I'll talk about that here in a minute. Self-focused, and then pattern of unstable relationships. Obviously, if you're a chronic liar and you don't care about others and you don't have any empathy and you're only focused on yourself, people are going to get tired of being in relationships with you, or you're going to cheat on them so much. If it's a significant romantic relationship, you're going to cheat on them so much that they can't stand it anymore. Or you're just going to get sick of them and you're going to be like, you disagreed with me a few times too many, you're gone. And I don't care what happens to you. So that unstable relationships is part of the characteristics. And then that lack of remorse, obviously, if you don't have empathy for other people, you're not going to feel sorry about anything that you've done to hurt them. Oh, and I'm forgetting to mention the pictures over on the other side. We had Hitler, which has been a large debate as to whether he fits into these characteristics or not. And then we had Anthony Perkins, who played Norman Bates in Psycho. So if you haven't seen the original of that, you should watch it, not the remake, the original. Ted Bundy's on this one. You probably know a lot about him. So key researchers in this area, the first one comes to us from the 1910s. He's a German guy. His name is Birnbaum. He studied criminals that were in prison for very heinous violent acts, mostly murder, but heinous violent acts. So he would look to their life histories, look at the life events, the social systems that they grew up in, that they had to navigate, the social situations they were in. And so that he came up with a good description, which is actually what we've been saying all along now. Cleckley, which gotta love Cleckley because he's an American, and we don't see a whole lot of American researchers on these historical or key people things, but he was from the 1940s. What he saw in his study of people with these characteristics is that they actually had no personality of their own, and they also had no empathy. So what you would see is this person would get into a social situation and they would kind of mimic whatever was going on in the situation. If people were angry, they would mimic being angry. If people were sad, they would pretend that they were sad. They would just make themselves look like that and use verbiage that modeled the rest of the group and what was going on. And that they really didn't have the ability to express any emotion of their own. So everything was just pretending to them and just mimicking what they see, which is an important part for treatment. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Cleckley wrote The Mask of Sanity. Even though it's a really old book, it still is tried and true. It's really, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, and you have a break coming up, you might want to look at that one. It's not too difficult of a read. The last one, Robert Hare, Canadian, 1970s. He's the one, he did a lot of research on this and actually came up with the Hare psychopathy checklist. And now there's a revised version. But what he did was he interviewed long-standing interviews, very long interviews with people who were thought to be in this particular group. And he had a list of characteristics similar to what we're talking about, where in these interviews you would just kind of mark how many times they exhibited this particular characteristic, and then he had kind of a scoring system where, you know, if you fell in between these two numbers, no problem. In between these, maybe a little problem. In between these, oh boy, you need to be out of society, right? Because you're just going to hurt people. Anyway, really good researcher. PCL is used today. A lot of psychiatrists use it, especially when you're looking at forensics stuff and looking at characters like Ted Bundy. He also wrote Without Conscious, 1993, so it's a little bit closer, still kind of far in the past, but another good read, and how people that we come across in our everyday lives fit into these characteristics and kind of how to find them out quicker so they do less damage. And then the last one is very interesting. It's called Snakes in Suits, and it's about like CEOs and major corporation heads and how their characteristics will be similar to those that we've been talking about, but instead of it doing harm, it helps them get further up the ladder in corporate America, which is kind of shocking and really sad. But anyway, interesting reads if you want to dig into that later on. Okay, something that, this is by Paul House and Williams, but really where I first learned about it was from Hare. This dark triangle and what Hare said and what others before him. Well, Paul House and Williams talked about subclinical levels of behavior, and Hare really talked about clinical levels of behavior. So you can see this triangle here and the three sides. With Hare, these were the original ones, but with Hare, he changed them up a little bit. So you see on the one side the Machiavellianism there on the right side, and that's that term that I mentioned a minute ago. That's a chronic liar. Machiavelli was a real person who was so gifted and talented at lying that he would tell these outrageous stories, and no one could ever tell if they were true or not. He was just that good of a liar. So that characteristic is very important for these people to get through with their business, right? Because they've got to convince you to give them your life savings, to contribute to a corporation, a Ponzi scheme, to follow them into war, basically, whatever that is. So they've got that characteristic going on. The one at the bottom, psychopathy, is not really, I mean, we hear that term a lot, but it doesn't necessarily mean what people think it means. So if you do the origin of the word, psych is psyche, that just means your mind. And the pathy part, or the opathy part, just really means it's like pathology. There's something wrong with your mind. So that's all there is. So any diagnosis could go in there, or for Paul House and Williams, it doesn't even have to be a clinical level diagnosis. You don't have to meet the whole criteria. You just have to have something else going on. And this last one on the left side of the triangle is narcissism. And so that, again, it's not, for Paul House and Williams, it's not necessarily narcissistic personality disorder. It's just a heavy dose of narcissism where I'm the best, I'm the smartest, everybody should do what I do and do what I say. And if you don't, then I'm just going to boot you out of my life. But instead, what Hare says is really the dark triangle is we have the Machiavellianism. And in psychopathy, we would really put in antisocial personality disorder, or perhaps borderline personality disorder. Right? Or it could be narcissistic personality disorder. Any of the personality disorders will go in there. And for Hare, what he would do is since we may have narcissistic personality disorder at the bottom of the triangle, he would get rid of that narcissism and add sadism. And sadism is where you enjoy can enjoy inflicting pain upon others. So for Hare, a true psychopath, the worst of the worst, we could call it the one that's going to fit the clinical stereotypical diagnosis, is going to have Machiavellianism, one of the personality disorders, and then sadism on the other side. So that's that important piece where we enjoy hurting people. So if you look at Ted Bundy, of course, we're going to have the chronic liar, we're going to have the antisocial personality disorder, and then we're going to have sadism, because he really did enjoy hurting other people physically. So that's the dark triangle, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing to know about. Okay, so how these things begin. Oh my gosh, and over here on the right, I have the Golden State Killer, which is Joseph D'Angelo. Okay, so that's him on the left because he was a police officer while he was doing his murdering, and he didn't get caught until he was like 70 years old. So he is secret keeper to the max, right? So, wow, and it was just recently that he was apprehended, so you can Google him and find out about him too. So the etiology, there's always the debate versus nature versus nurture versus biology, like so many other things. Biologists, psychobiologists think that there's a genetic determinant in here, but they don't know which one. And so really I tend to kind of throw that one off. And I'm much more familiar with the other two. So with nature, they're talking about someone who is born without the ability to have empathy and without the ability to really experience a lot of emotions. But the nurture part, I think, is where most of this comes from, because I believe that all people are born with the ability to empathize with other people. That's just my belief. But the nurture part is that you're born with all that good stuff, but somehow society or the environment that you are raised in squishes it out of you. Right, so you're abused as a child, you're raised by another person who has antisocial personality disorder, or narcissistic, or whatever it may be. You're raised in that environment, so you learn how to make it through life with those characteristics. I can tell you a little bit of a story, not to be too much about myself, but my first husband, when he was a little kid, his father would they'd go out to dinner, and his father would send him around to the other tables to take the tips for the waitstaff off the other tables and bring them back to him. So that's a problem, right? Cute little blonde-headed kid, but so the parent is using the child to do something that is harmful to other people, but he's going to get away with it because he's such a cute little kid, and would not have known that that was a bad thing to do, but the father was telling him to do it. So anyway, nurture, I think, is where we're going, but again, that's just my opinion. I don't think they're born without the capacity for empathy. I think society squishes it out of them due to those adverse childhood experiences, and I mean truly adverse childhood experiences. I don't mean the kind where you don't think you were the favorite kid. You may not have been. I mean severely adverse experiences. There is some talk about brain damage may do this. Traumatic brain injury may be a part of this. Obviously, we know that if there is traumatic brain injury, sometimes people's personalities change, and sometimes they're different than they were before. So, but that, I'm not sure what to say about that, other than sometimes I think that happens. And then genetic stuff is still, we don't really know. I'll tell you another thing that I forgot to put here in a slide. So one of the things that happens is that you can see some of these things coming out in childhood. And early in childhood, we have a disorder that's called oppositional defiant disorder. And that's a child that has some of these characteristics. They think they're right. They think they should be able to do whatever they want to do, and they don't care what happens to other people. But they are not going to follow the rules simply because they're not going to follow the rules. It's not because they don't know them. It's not because they don't understand them. It's because they don't want to do what someone else tells them to do. So that's oppositional defiant disorder. When you get into adolescence, there's a disorder called conduct disorder. And that's similar, same characteristics, except with conduct disorder, it gets more serious because we're talking about someone in adolescence. So you may be looking at taking someone else's car for a joyride. You may be looking at drinking underage, smoking underage. You may be looking at petty theft. You may be a person who's a fighter and you're just beating people up all the time, right? Like meet me in the playground after school or meet me at the lake. Um, Sorry about that. Didn't realize that was on. So anyway, so that would be conduct disorder. And then you get into the adult disorders. But so here's the confusing part of it, is that some children with oppositional defiant disorder will move into conduct disorder as they age, right? They'll just keep going. Not all children do this. Some children do this. And some children will not have oppositional defiant disorder and they'll jump right into conduct disorder. Some children will have oppositional defiant disorder and they'll move past it. It doesn't just go away. You have to do some kind of psychological interventions with it, but they'll move past it. And so some will just jump from nowhere into conduct disorder. And then what happens with conduct disorder is some, not all, but some of those kids will grow into a personality disorder. And usually with conduct disorder, it's going to be antisocial personality disorder. Now, it's true also that some people don't have ODD or conduct disorder, and they just jump into antisocial personality disorder. But some of those conduct disorder people will gravitate into that, or they'll just age into it. So it's not a clear path, but for some people, it is a path. It's not a path for everyone, which is part of what makes psychology so interesting and so confusing, is that there are many, many ways for one person to get to any particular disorder, right? That's the term, remember the term equifinality? That's what that is. Many different ways to get to the same end point. Okay, so that's the whole etiology bit of it. Treatment, oh, you gotta love Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. Treatment, number one thing, which I think is a mistake that a lot of prison systems use because they don't offer much treatment, but they will put people in groups and call it group therapy. No group therapy for these people. Because remember, if you go back to they don't have personalities of their own, they have no empathy, but they will manipulate and lie themselves into the situation and pretend to just be having the same emotions as everyone around them. When they go to group therapy, they're just honing their craft, right? They're learning how to look more sad, more angry, more confused, more frustrated, more sympathetic. They're learning how to look like they're empathetic, right? So they're just honing that craft. They're just getting better at it. So you don't want to do group therapy with these people. And that's really, if they're going to get any therapy, that's probably what they're going to get in prison. So they're just learning how to do it better. Cognitive behavior therapy works wonders with some of these disorders. And when you get into this part of wanting to call someone as, or say they're on the dark triad, I don't know how well it will work, but if you're just looking at the personality disorders, CBT does work, and it changes your thinking, changes your behavior, your actions, and allows for a little bit of emotion to come into that. But you have to train people how to do that, and they have to practice it, and it's not easy, right? None of this is easy. You can also add psychotropic drugs if you want to, antipsychotics. They will put people on, and mood stabilizers, which actually both of those just flatten them out so that they're probably still lying to you, but there'll be a slip. They won't be quite as good at it. So there'll be a little bit of a slip in it, a little trip up. So they won't be quite so crafty with it, but that's also not going to make their personality disorder go away. Those personality characteristics are going to be there. They're just a little bit blunted by the medication. So while that can help with the most severe cases, it's not going to fix anything. Cognitive behavioral therapy if someone can practice it, get used to it, and put it into play and in their life, it can change the personality traits a little bit. It's going to move them a little bit on the mark, on the big five, which you read about in your textbook. So it's going to move the mark a little bit, but not drastically. So they're going to kind of have to always work on this and always be part of it. And I'm not one for lifelong therapy. You go in and out of therapy as you need to, but this is a group where they're going to need lifelong therapy because this stuff is just really hard to do. Okay, so if you have any questions or anything you want to know about, you can ask your instructor for this online course, or you can head to the chat cafe, or you can email me at RSU, and I will get back to you with answers as best I can. So I hope you've enjoyed this little talk and got something different from what's in our textbook, and maybe it's answered some questions for you. I don't know about that, but hopefully so. Bye-bye.